Fellas, say goodbye to Chuck Sherman the boy. I am now a man. I highly recommend you join the club. We are doing the wild thing all night.
Acid house music.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Sherm.
Sherman, I cooked all this food. Is that all you gonna eat?
General Sherman realized and understood the importance of house music.
So, do you know anything about techno?
No.
Listen.
Get it on.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another brand new episode of Sherm in the Booth. I'm, of course, your host, Sherm. Today is Wednesday, August 5th, 2020. I cannot believe we are already into August, but here we are. This is episode 121, and I am so excited about this one, guys. I have a fellow podcaster in the game, but this guy is a veteran. He goes by the name of Jaime Black, and he is the host of Chicago's first and longest-running music podcast called Dynasty Podcasts. This guy has over 15 years of experience in the podcasting arena and so many awesome stories to tell. In this episode, guys, we discussed his journey through the media and broadcast world and how he actually got involved in podcasting. We also talked about how the online arena for growing brands has changed and how it's so important to target niche audiences. We discussed the past, present, and future of podcasting. It was really, really cool to hear a guy who got involved really at the forefront of it all and how much he's seen change. We also discussed some classes that he hosts, including podcasting and freelancing, and Jaime is going to be one of the first people to tell you it's so important to understand the business side of this industry, and he's got a lot of great tips that I'm excited for you guys to hear. I actually took his podcasting 101 class last year, and we had a great connection. I knew I wanted to have him on the show so I could get his full story. It's not often you get to interview another interviewer, so it was really, really good conversation. I'm so excited for you guys to hear this one. This is episode 121 with Jaime Black. Ladies and gentlemen, Jaime Black. Cheers to you, sir.
How's it going?
This is a genuine pleasure. Before we went on air, I was just talking about how I took your podcasting 101 class. Been following you closely ever since then and doing my research on you. And it's a pleasure to have another podcaster on the podcast.
Yeah, it's always cool to do that. You know, I every once in a while get to interview people who have podcasts, and you and I have talked, and you know, I interviewed Willie Joy maybe like a year or two ago. And Willie Joy, I've known him since he was a musician, and he's still a musician, but now he's also very prominent as a podcaster. And there's something kind of fun about getting to talk to other podcasters and be like, hey, you know what I'm talking about. You've been through this too.
Yeah, and, I listen to his back-to-back podcast pretty frequently.
Oh, yeah. It's great.
It's great. And to me, he really is the pinnacle of kind of the lane I'm in, at least. I'm trying to do a few different things, but to me, Willie Joy is interviewing the biggest and best talent in the electronic music industry. I listened to his interview with Danny Deal, who I'm sure you're familiar with.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
I had no idea Willie had lived in Chicago and really had a lot of roots here. Yeah.
I mean, when I was a young guy in my 20s, you know, like Matt Rohn, Willie Joy, and Flosstradamus were like three of the big DJ talents coming up in the city. And there was like, you know, Cool Kids and Kid Sister and Lupe. And, you know, it was a lot like in my head, I view that as kind of like the start of a lot of the independent music wave that has like carried over to the moment that we're in now. Was like this post Kanye moment where, like I said, you know, Floss and Cool Kids and a lot of talent, you know, came out, and they were just kids. They were independent kids playing, you know, small rooms in Chicago, just like now. But, you know, we didn't have like the advantage, and I say we, me being a creator, not a DJ back then, but like, right. You know, we didn't have like Instagram and stuff, but Willie Joy was definitely very much in that space and very prominent in Chicago. So yeah, I have a lot of respect for that guy, but yeah, I am glad to be talking to another podcaster as well.
Look at you wrapping around the whole answer there and encompassing it all. That is what I'm talking about right there. This is going to be a good interview.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Of course. Are you originally from Chicago?
I am, yeah. You know, I mean, I grew up in Oak Park, but that's like 20 minutes outside of Chicago. But I've always lived in this area. I mean, technically, I was born like outside Detroit, but we moved to Chicago when I was a few months old. So, yeah, you know, I'm from this area for sure.
Of course, you've seen a lot of different types of talent come in and out of Chicago. I mean, what's the city of Chicago mean to you? Just like the city itself, the music culture, the food culture, everything.
Yeah, I mean, wow, that's that's like a 9-hour answer. I mean, the short version, or I'll try to keep it short, is like,
Yeah.
to me, Chicago is a city that it's it's built on hard work, and it doesn't matter what space you're in. If you're in the restaurant business, the music business, the hotel hospitality, the tech space, on and on, you name it, like you're not going to get very far here unless you do the work. And that's the bottom line, really, no matter what kind of creator or industry you're in. And some people can be a fluke and get by for a while, but it's like the people who last in this city and the people who, endure, they're creators. And that's something I've always seen, is that people, they have to work hard, they have to be able to adapt and reinvent themselves. And I've seen a lot of music scenes and a lot of different kind of like culture shifts in the city over the last 20 plus years that I've been working in media here. But that's always the constant, is that like it's always people who are doing something new, different, bringing a lot of innovation and a lot of ambition, and they're doing the work, and those are the ones who people remember, and who people, like we were saying, like cool kids and stuff,
Yeah.
those are the ones who last and who have a long-term career in the city versus just being kind of an overnight flash in the pan.
For sure. I think there are a lot of, let's call them pillars of Chicago, right? Whether it be in food and music culture. Those people who stay and still represent Chicago, even the Barack Obamas, the Lupe Fiascos, the Kanye West, the Flosstradamuses, right? Like, they wear Chicago on their sleeve, and where they're from. And I think that's what makes Chicago, Chicago. I grew up outside of Indianapolis, and I always knew I wanted to get to Chicago after graduating college. I mean, there's no secret there's not much of a music scene in Indianapolis, but Chicago is really the breeding grounds for people who want to make it, and people, like we said before, who really want to do what they love. Because you can do it. You can build a name here. Like New York, LA, that's great. But the people that are living in Chicago always will live in Chicago. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I talk a lot about New York and LA on my podcast, and I love those cities. They're fun cities to go visit. They're not places that I ever really had an interest in living in, not because they're not, again, wonderful cities, but New York and LA are fantastic places to go work for some of the coolest companies in the world. Chicago is a great place to build your own company.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about Chicago.
Yeah, I like that. Absolutely. Well, when did you really get your start, in the radio personality world? I mean, obviously podcasting really became a thing in, the early 2000s. What was it like for you? You're mentioning in your 20s, coming across the people like Willie Joy and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, to answer the first part of that, I got my start when I was 15 years old. I got an internship at a radio station. Actually, between my freshman and sophomore year, I got 3 radio internships. One at a college station, Loyola Radio, then at a major rock station called Rock 103.5 that's not around anymore. And then 6 months later, the DJ I worked with, he moved to a station called Q101, which was the alternative station here for like 20 odd years. And I went with him to Q101, and I was there for 13 years. And so I worked with this guy, Chris Payne. He was a DJ, and Chris taught me just everything about business, media, being a personality, having a career, building a brand, all these things that now we have names for them, but like it wasn't called building a brand back then. But it was very much about like how to have like a specific personality and how to approach the media and the business of things. So I got this incredible education in high school doing radio internships for all 4 years of high school. I did an internship at the Metro for a few years. I worked at the Onion as an intern here in Chicago for like a year or two. And then it went from there. And then, a couple years later, when I was in my 20s, I discovered podcasting, or, not like I discovered it, like I was not the first podcaster, but it was something that like I found podcasting, found out what it was, and I started it early. So for me, I was always like, I was 15 years old calling a radio station, not calling the request line, although I did that too, but I was calling the business line, asking to speak to their promotions manager, asking for an internship when I was a freshman in high school. And they're just like, what are you talking about? Like, what at best, man? But I was just annoyingly persistent. And that's kind of how I really got my start in this world. And I've been working in it in one form or another ever since.
That's truly incredible. I mean, do you know, if you think back, where that stemmed from? Was it your parents? Was it like a love of the, television era, or where did it come from?
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally know. And it's something that I've seen a lot with the students that I have taught at Columbia College, because now I teach over at Columbia College, Chicago, here in Chicago. And I have seen firsthand that like when Chance the Rapper came out, for example, like that was this moment for this past generation. Like when Chance erupted, he's a hometown hero, he's a homegrown success story, and he uniquely belongs to that generation that's been in college, 5, 7 years ago or whatever.
Right.
And I saw that pride with Chance. And for me, it was when I was like in grade school in the early 90s, I discovered Siamese Dream by the Smashing Pumpkins. And at that time, every band was from Seattle, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, etc.
Right.
And then you had 4 weirdos from Chicago. And that was literally the first time I'd ever seen in action that you could be successful and you could have a creative career being from Chicago. And the Smashing Pumpkins 100% was like that Chance the Rapper moment for me, that I've seen with so many students over the years, where they got inspired to work in music or culture or photography because of like what was happening around that Chance moment.
Right.
So, for me, it was Smashing Pumpkins. Like Smashing Pumpkins really put me on the path to want to work in music and broadcast, because I was not going to become a musician. But, radio, believe it or not, this is going to sound crazy to anyone younger. Radio used to be cool in the early 90s and mid 90s. And it sounds absolutely insane to say like radio used to be cool, because unfortunately radio is not cool now, but it was cool back then. And I wanted to be part of that party.
Of course. I mean, the amount of times B96 as an influence has come up for DJ that I talked to in Chicago. I mean,
sure.
And I would say maybe still to a certain extent it has an influence here in Chicago. People don't listen to the radio like they used to, obviously, at this point with streaming and XM and things like that. But I mean, that really is a humble beginning, if you ask me. I mean, seriously.
It was a long time ago, and I was a kid, and I was just like, I was like, oh, I'm going to go do this. And I mean, it seems really crazy now, but I just thought, like, what, am I going to wait till I'm 21 to get my first internship? That's 6 years away. Let me go do this now.
I love that. I mean, seriously, like, were there some influences around that time? Any mentors, like, when you first started getting into those situations?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that guy, Chris Payne, he was a DJ in Chicago in the 90s and 2000s and 2010s for a little while. But I mean, he was a prominent DJ in Chicago. Now he's an attorney. He's very successful as an attorney. But I would listen to his show late at night in middle school and high school, and he would interview Marilyn Manson, and his show was a party, and he would play all the like super aggressive Metallica songs and the Tool songs that were not singles. And so for me, as like a long, believe it or not, long-haired alt rock, death rock kid from the suburbs of Chicago, just totally doing my best Wayne Campbell, I was like, fuck yeah, this is where I want to be. I want to be hanging out with the DJ who plays the Metallica songs, and every once in a while they throw in some fucks in there,
Yeah.
And then I got to work with him, and I got to work with a lot of really great people when I was in high school and college. So I always felt incredibly fortunate. That was one of the reasons I wanted to start teaching, was because I was like, I see so often where people are like, oh man, I wish someone had ever given me some mentorship or given me some direction when I was, starting out. And I'm always like, man, I'm really lucky. I got a lot of that stuff. So I have tried to, pay that forward in teaching and try and prepare these younger kids at Columbia for like what a career in media and entertainment and the creative industries is like, so that hopefully they have a little bit of, preparation for that.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's such an important part to understand about the music industry specifically, is the business side of it all, right? Like, it's great to be an incredible producer and have an awesome mind, but it's debatably more important to understand how to get involved and how to, again, understand the business aspect of it. And that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I see a lot, because I teach this class over at Columbia College. It's called Self-Management and Freelancing. And it's a mix of like 40 odd kids who have all different majors. So I have, photography students, comedy students, music students, management, etc. So I'm not teaching these students how to be better at their craft, because a 19-year-old knows how to use Instagram and TikTok way better than me. Like, I'm not going to educate them about that.
Right.
But they don't know how to read a contract. They don't know how to send an invoice. They don't know how to pitch a project. They certainly don't know how to price their work, build a budget. These are the things that we're teaching there. Yeah. And those are things that are still helpful. Like, I wish that I had good mentorship, but I still wish I had known more of that stuff when I was starting out, because I didn't know how to make a budget at 19. I didn't know how to build multiple revenue streams or build a portfolio. Like, those things were just lost on me. So yeah, like, if you're 19, you've been using Adobe Creative Cloud for your whole, adolescent and early adult life. So you don't need someone to teach you how to use Photoshop, but you do need somebody to teach you that like contracts are not written with your best interest in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really, really powerful information. I have a lot of young people who do listen to this podcast, and you answered one of my future questions, and it really is true. You do need to think about how are you going to make money from this stuff. And it's difficult, right? Because a lot of people who aren't creatives themselves expect these things to be cheaper pretty much every time. I mean, Jaime, you could be a wedding DJ, you could be a graphic designer for clubs to make flyers, right? And pretty much 99% of the time, people are going to be like, that's way more than I thought it was going to be.
Yes. I mean, I run into that all the time where people will hit me up and they say, hey, I want to launch a podcast, for myself or for my company.
Yeah.
And I say, okay, I've got a class. And they go, no. I want to do the whole thing, blah, blah, blah. And I'll quote them some numbers. And I'm like, look, I've done this for 15 years. I've worked with blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then half the time the conversation stops. And I'm like, man, I'm sorry. Like, I've done this for too long to, do this work for $20 a pop, like some kid on Fiverr. And like more power to the kid on Fiverr who's working cheap because he needs to build his portfolio or their portfolio. But, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, you have to value your worth and of course, how much time you put in. I want to ask about Dynasty Podcasts, though. Chicago's first and longest running music podcast. What was the timeline like between maybe the internships and when you started that?
Well, so the podcast thing is interesting because I started podcasting in 2005. Now, sometimes people hear that and they go, oh my God, that's amazing. Like that was so early on. And it was early on. But I feel like sometimes I get this credit that like I Zuckerberged podcast and like I invented it. And I'm like, not at all. Because if you look at the reality, I was working at a radio station, booking bands for interviews as the producer of a radio show. So I was already like doing broadcast work. I was already reaching out to artists.
Right.
I worked at the Apple store, teaching people how to use iTunes and iPods because that was brand new.
Wow.
And, social media was just starting, like MySpace was just starting. So I was like already starting to promote my stuff on social media a little bit. So a lot of people, I think it's unfair to just make it sound like I, discovered podcasting or something. Like it's more like it was a meal kit that arrived at my house with all the ingredients. I was already working at Apple and a radio station, interviewing and booking artists and posting stuff online. I just really had all the pieces to already put it together. It's just that no one was doing it in that direction at that time.
Sure, of course. I mean, to be coined really, and I mean, it is, legitimized. Honestly, you were the first and still longest running. Here we are. This is a music podcast. You're on it. I've been to your classes. I mean, it's pretty incredible. What was like the original reason you decided, okay, here I am. I've got all of the meals in this toolkit. Now I need to cook this meal. Do you remember that moment? Do you remember that day?
I don't remember like the actual day, but I know a lot of what drove it was that even though I loved the radio gig, and I still do, like I have nothing but like the best, fondest, most appreciative memories of working in radio, and it was the coolest thing with the best people, so I loved it.
Yeah.
That said, the only kind of asterisk on that is that I was working as a producer, so by and large, I wasn't doing very many interviews, and every once in a while, I got to do an interview. Like one time, the radio host, sometimes we would book, our show aired on Sunday nights, so sometimes we would record the interviews during the week. And one week the DJ just couldn't make it. Chris Payne couldn't make it. He's like, you know what? You go interview the band. They can come in on Thursday. I can't make it at Thursday. Yeah. That band was Fall Out Boy. So every once in a while I got to luck into stuff like that in 2003,
Yeah.
But by and large, I wasn't getting to do a lot of interviews. And when you're 19, 20, 21, 22, that's when you're going out all the time. That's when you're like, going to shows, going to clubs, going to parties. And so I was seeing stuff like Flostradamus. I was seeing stuff like that start to come up and happen around the city where I had not seen independent music like that emerging in the city in that direction. And also, as crazy as it sounds, hip hop and DJing was not like, it's not like now. There was no Fake Shore Drive. There was no, like Flostradamus was very new in that space where they were, two kids who mashed up a Sigur Rós song with Overnight Celebrity by Kanye and Twista, and that went on MySpace and blogs, and it felt like we were discovering something, and I was like, whoa, these are just two kids playing the same parties that I go to, and I would see them out and stuff.
Yeah.
So for me, like, I was going out all the time. I was seeing this kind of stuff that wouldn't make sense for us to feature at the radio station. And that even if we brought them to the radio station, I wouldn't get to do the interviews. And it really was that simple. I was just like, I just want to do a radio show my way. It's
Yeah.
not going to be on the radio, but you know what? Like, we can share the MP3 on MySpace. We can say fuck as much as we want. And if I want to interview some weird underground, two-man DJ group that certainly is never going to go anywhere at all. Obviously, I'm joking, right?
Yeah.
But we didn't know that. Like Flosstradamus, they made a cool mashup. That's all, So I was like, let me just interview these two guys.
Yeah.
This will never fly on the radio station, but if I have a podcast, I can do that. So that was what it was. Is that I just wanted like my own platform to do the kind of stuff I wanted to do that wouldn't fit in the framework of the larger operation I was a part of.
Absolutely. Now, did it start as a music podcast, or you've had lots of different types of people on, and you've had lots of different subsets of the show? What's been some of the reasons that you decided, okay, maybe I want to try entrepreneurs, maybe I want to try different type of musicians, stuff like that?
Well, yeah, it was. Let's try this again, like I've been talking for a long time. Initially, it was a music podcast, and it was really just a music podcast. And so, like I said, we were interviewing, Flosstradamus, Kid Sister, like Heaven 70s. Man, I mean, I've done so many that it's like hard to even think of them. But a lot of music interviews, and then like this Gemini Club and Hey Champ Wave hit and Midnight Conspiracy. And long story short, I just sort of ran out of musicians.
Yeah.
I just sort of like, because I was really focusing only on the Chicago sector.
Yeah.
So I just was like, I started hitting a point where I was interviewing the same artists over and over again. And that was happening around the 10-year anniversary of the podcast, like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So that was when myself and some of the collaborators I was working with then, we decided to do an initiative called Dynasty. What was it called? Like Dynasty First? I don't even remember. God damn. But I think it was called Dynasty First. The idea was just like to interview people we had not interviewed before.
Okay.
Or maybe hadn't interviewed in like 5 years. We'd only done one interview with them. So then I interviewed a whole lot of like young, new talent that was coming out right around, like I said, like that chance moment.
Mm-hmm.
But it just hit a point where like, A, I'd run out of musicians that I hadn't talked to, and B, now Chicago is not just a music city, whereas maybe in like the 2000s, everything was focused around music, and even the early 2010s.
Right.
But then all of a sudden it became about like photographers and, like writers and bloggers and, videographers and, promoters have always been around. So they're part of the conversation. And then tech hit the city. And so now if you say Chicago, it's not just a city where like, it's not just Al Capone, Oprah, Kanye, and Jordan, Chicago means a lot of things to different people.
Yeah.
So now it's like, if I'm interviewing only Chicago talent on the show, or at least on the main show, Chicagoverse, it doesn't have to just be music because A, I'll run out of people, and B, that means that I'm not interviewing somebody who's opening up a really innovative restaurant or hotel concept or, an author or somebody from the Tribe or, the Reader or something like that. There's just so many people doing cool stuff here now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads me to my next question. And to honestly share my own point of view as well.
Yeah.
I at first said, okay, I love talking about music. I'm going to do DJs. I'm going to give them a platform to talk about that, right? And then I was like, oh, well, I actually have a lot of other different passions. I want to talk about health and wellness. I want to talk about entrepreneurship. I want to talk about business and this and that, right? And now to a certain extent, right, this is episode, I think, 121, Jaime. So I haven't done nearly as many as you.
That's a lot, though. That's an accomplishment. A lot of people start doing this and they get like 4 episodes. So
I stop, right?
Yeah, but it is.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And that's the thing too. I enjoy it so much, and throughout the process, I've kind of discovered what I want to get out of it, right? Because I, for so long, was searching for the wrong things. I was looking for people who could give me more likes, really things that don't actually matter. And I said, I need to look back. What am I going to get out of this, right? What am I looking to get out of it? Because I'm not doing this. Yes, I'm giving people a platform to talk about their story, but I want to learn things that I can take on my own. So I switched a lot of paths. I interviewed different people, and I found myself discovering a lot about not only them, but also interests of my own. And my question for you is, you've interviewed thousands of different types of people. I mean, you were just talking about musicians, entrepreneurs, businessmen, photographers, restaurant owners. When you are setting up these interviews, do you have a template that you use, or how do you kind of do your research and formulate your questions for different types of, let's call them verticals?
I'm going to give you a super nerdy but honest answer. So, do you ever watch the show Lost?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, Lost is like my favorite show, and I just never like I got so into Lost to the degree that like when Game of Thrones came out, people were like, watch Game of Thrones, and I'm like, nope, I went way too overboard at the last one. I'm not touching that where I have to read a bunch of books. Okay,
I know what you mean. It was a letdown for me at Lost, to be honest with you. Yeah.
there was a lot there, but to answer your question, because you're like, wait, why are we talking about Lost now?
Yeah.
There was a rule on Lost, because I read a lot of interviews with the producers, where like the only mysteries that they were really dead set on answering were the mysteries that were interesting to the characters on the show. So they weren't going to like go out of their way to answer something unless like Locke or Jack or somebody cared about it. Okay. For me, when I'm interviewing people, I don't really have like a set, like, I don't have like a boilerplate 10 questions or whatever. I just really try to think like, what am I interested in? What is this person interested in talking about? And what is the audience going to be interested in hearing about from this person? Because if it doesn't kind of check off at least one or two of those, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to ask someone about questions where they're going to be bored. And I don't want to talk to someone about something if the audience is tuning out. I don't want to be like, oh man, remember that time in 2007 when we were in the same elevator and blah, 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 because no one cares about that.
Right.
But if I'm asking like, hey, you crowdfunded this new book that you're writing, talking about how did you do that and what was the process like in building that, process or whatever. That's a bad example, but you get what I'm saying. Like I'm trying to get to topics that are going to be interesting and beneficial to the listener and hopefully interesting for the guest to talk about and that I am not going to be bored by. So to me, I'm trying to like check off at least two of those boxes, if not three. Again, I don't want to answer mysteries that, the characters aren't interested in, right? But I did think about that a lot, and I'm like, that's a good rule of thumb for like storytelling. It's like you have to make sure that you're actually serving a purpose with what you're talking about. Otherwise, no one cares. There's just too much content on the web that if you're boring, people are like, I can just watch The Office for the 400th time,
Oh my God, that's so perfect. But I agree. Like what I try and do is, and what I've really come into with this podcast is trying to tell the visual audio, let's call it maybe autobiography, right? Like, and I'm the editor and I'm trying to help whoever's writing this book tell their story. And
right.
I relate to you on that. And it's a tough job and it really only comes to practice, right?
Totally. Yeah. And I was not a good interviewer at all when I started. I mean, really, I was not like this is my sad like name drops, but like when I did that Fall Out Boy interview that I mentioned earlier in 2003, it's not a good interview. And I published it on the podcast years and years ago. Like if you go look for it, it's out there.
Yeah.
But they did not have media training. I mean, this is for their first like independent album. They didn't have media training and I had no interview training. So you had 5 guys in a room and none of them knew what they were doing. And it's a bad interview. And I was a bad interviewer at first. And I had to, just like anything, right? Like, and we all know the 10,000 hours, blah, blah, blah. But I only became decent at it by doing it a bunch of times, Yeah. But interviewing is definitely an art, as you know. It's not easy.
Of course. And I think that's probably why a lot of people don't podcast for a long period of time, because it's really fun for them at the beginning and more importantly to the people doing it, those who are listening and contributing, right? But you just got to keep it consistent.
Keeping up with anything, whether it's a blog or a podcast or a YouTube series or whatever it is, it's like, I mean, I don't want to sound like, I don't know, cold or flippant by saying this, but it's like there's just a lot of projects out there that have episode 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
And then ... And I empathize. I get it. It's hard to do these things, especially when there's not a monetary return initially or maybe ever. So I fully, like you said, like this has to be something, or really I think any digital pursuit, it has to be something you love because you might not make that money overnight and people might not get it overnight. People certainly did not get my podcast overnight. Like, now, people are like, oh my God, that's so cool. You started this 15 years ago. But in 2005, really, people were just like, I mean, especially working in a multi-million-dollar radio station that was like KISS FM level, but in the rock space. Yeah. There was a KISS FM level station, and I was doing internet radio that I was sharing on MySpace. And, there was definitely a sense of just like, that's adorable, sweetie. How cute that you have pretend radio on the internet. The adults are talking now, So now podcasting's legit and radio's all over it, but it was not that way 15 years ago.
I know, seriously. Well, over the course of the past 15 years, who have been some of your favorite interviews then?
Right off the bat, the best interview I've ever done on the podcast, I 100% know it. It's Joe Shanahan in, God, it was probably 7 years ago now, because I'm the same age as the Metro. And so 7 years ago or so, they did the 30th anniversary of the Metro.
Right?
What's up?
He's the owner, right?
Yes, Joe Shanahan's the owner, founder, father of the Metro. And so, and the Metro holds like so much significance for me. It was always some place I heard about growing up because that's where the Pumpkins played their first show. So it really had this like mystical Valhalla quality that was never lost for me. Every time I ever go there, I'm just like, this is an important building. This is an important place. It's a temple. So I got to interview Joe Shanahan for the 30th anniversary of the Metro, and we did it downtown Chicago in the Loop because they had rented out a lobby of a office building in the Loop, and they put up all these posters from the past 30 years, and they had all this memorabilia, tickets, the flyer from the first show at the Metro, which was REM in 1982 for $5. I mean, just cool stuff,
Wow.
And called it the Metrospective, which is just so good. And so I got to sit down with Joe Shanahan for like 20, 30 minutes or so and ask him. I mean, it was the Chris Farley show. It really was. If you've ever seen those old Chris Farley skits on SNL, because he's done everything. He's booked, Madonna, Nirvana, Prince, U2, REM, everybody. Gave the Pumpkins their first show. So I got to be like, what was Kurt Cobain like? And it really was just inches away from just being like, remember when you were in the Beatles, But that was my favorite one I've ever gotten to do because it was just so cool. And he's such a living historian of music and culture in this city. And that's not, I mean, I love a lot of the interviews I've done, but that one always stands out as just something special where I'm like, wow, man, like, I'm so glad I got to have that conversation and I got it captured on audio and video.
Oh my gosh, I know that feeling. And honestly, Metro and Smart Bar, I know a lot of DJs who have played at Smart Bar, and just the experience. I went to the 23-hour party there last year, actually. And I shook hands with Joe because a good friend of mine is a resident DJ at Smart Bar, and it was when James Murphy was playing. This is...
Oh, wow.
I think it was 4:30 p.m. And for those who don't know, the lead singer of LCD Sound System, right? And he's playing Metro. And I'm like, what is going on, right? And I'm sitting in this historic venue. I'm upstairs because James is playing on the opposite side of the stage, actually. And I just felt something in the air. I mean, it was like,
it's a special place.
It is, and you feel it. And I think that is such a important thing to understand about what's going on right now. Is there are a lot of metros of the world, especially in Chicago, and it almost physically pains me. I think it does physically pain me when I think about the fact that those places need help and they run on, shows, and it's just tough.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously is a larger conversation about the Save Our Stages movement that's happening right now. And I think all of us, we're rooting for them and we want them to get the support that they need on a national level and the funding they need or forgiveness they need so that they can stay in business. Because, everybody, if you've lived in Chicago for any amount of time, you have a Metro store. You have a store where you're like, oh my God, I was there, at Smart Bar at 4 a.m. and I bumped into Perry Farrell coming out of the bathroom. Or you're like, oh my God, I went there after Lollapalooza was over and whoever played a secret show. Like I got to see like them Crooked Vultures, which is like Dave Grohl, Josh from Queens of the Stone Age, and like one of the guys from Zeppelin, like doing a super group, and it's like, that's insane. So like everyone has their Metro story. That place really means something, especially now that like everything is so Live Nation and like whatever. I've seen shows at the United Center that are also amazing, but it doesn't mean the same thing as a Metro show. And we need those independent rooms in Chicago and across the country. Like we need independent places that are going to take a chance on a smaller band, whether they become Nirvana or not. It's just important that exists.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. And, to that point, you take a lot of chances by doing these classes that you do, Jaime, and I want to acknowledge you and commend you for that. The review I wrote about your podcast was I've been doing Sherman the Booth for maybe 2.5, 3 years, I guess. I think it was last summer. And I learned so much from your class, just like simple things that saved me a lot of time and fundamentals. And it was just great to really have that teacher there because podcasting is something that you just kind of pick up and start. And there are not a lot of avenues, at least for people I know in Chicago, that actually have that teacher aspect. And it was so great to just raise my hand and say, hey, this is the issue I'm having, and you walk us through everything and be able to ask you. When did you decide to start this podcasting 101 class, and what are some of the other classes you offer as well?
I started the class maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and it was something that was just like 100% just a what if. It was just this thing that I was just kind of like throwing out there. I pitched it to like 1871 a few times. I went into 1871 and did a very, early version of the workshop. I don't think I got paid, and I'm not saying they screwed me over like they didn't pay me. I mean, I don't think there was an agreement that I was going to get paid for it. It was really, I think, it was like a comedian just going to, like one of these underground places unannounced and doing a 20-minute set. And you're like, oh my God, that person was here tonight? And they're like, yeah, they were just workshopping stuff. So I just kind of like brought that workshop to different places, here and there, like a college here, a tech space here and there, for like a year or two. And not that often, but it was something where I was like, okay, there's 7 people in the room, no one paid to be here, but people seem interested in this.
Yeah.
And in 2017, Airbnb launched Experiences here in Chicago. And for anyone who's not familiar with Airbnb Experiences, it is this platform where you can purchase an experience through the Airbnb site. So the idea of it originally was that, let's say you go to New York. Well, maybe the first time you go to New York, you want to go to Midtown and you want to go to Times Square because, whatever, like Times Square, any New Yorker is going to be like, that's cheesy as hell. But sure, the first time you go to New York, go see Times Square just to see it. The 7th time you go to New York, you don't want to go to the M&M store and Times Square. Maybe you do, but you shouldn't. There's a lot more to do in New York. And, same thing like in Chicago. First time you come down here, great. Maybe go to the Bean, maybe. But if you're on your 5th trip to Chicago and you're still hanging out at the Bean, like, holy shit, you're missing stuff. So yeah. Airbnb wanted to create these travel experiences that previously were only in person until this year. And the idea was that if someone comes to Chicago, they could take a neighborhood tour, or they could go to like a comedy club, night where like a host will take them to 3 different comedy clubs and introduce them to people in the comedy club scene. And I pitched this podcast class. They published it in the first round of experiences here in Chicago when the store launched in summer 2017. And, thank God people started signing up. And then all of a sudden I had people coming to my house for 3 years, paying to come and sit and listen to me talk about podcasting. And it's crazy because in 2005, I couldn't have paid people to listen to me talk about I couldn't have, like, let me give you money and let me talk to you about what this is. They would have been like, no, I don't need this, Yeah. So I launched that a few years ago, and now I'm trying to develop and launch some new classes. I've got a live streaming class. I've got a podcast promotion class because the initial podcast class is much more about production. And I'm experimenting with the idea of doing a 2-day, 12-hour podcasting masterclass where we go through like everything, the production, the promotion, the live streaming, making a website, analytics, developing merch, building a subscription model, like the whole thing. I mean, it's a long list. Who knows if anyone's going to sign up for that. Yeah. And then I'm also developing some entrepreneurial and freelancing classes as well that I'm in the process of, fine-tuning and still working on a bit. But the initial class, the Intro to Freelancing class, by the time this podcast is out, will be on sale already. And you can get that at www.dynastyacademy.com. You need to put the www because something with the forwarding between GoDaddy and the teaching site, but www.dynastyacademy.com. And that's the thing that I'm really hoping takes off, because I want to build this larger curriculum like we talked about to help artists and independent creatives learn how to make their work a business. To me, like, that feels like something important that I want to be able to contribute.
That is awesome, Jaime. And honestly, I need to take your live streaming class because it's something that I want to get into more, because I'm pretty confident, like we talked about earlier, there's not going to be a vaccine for a while, and that means that international DJs are not going to be touring the world for quite some time. I mean,
yeah. Even once it's a vaccine, yeah, like it's not going to open clubs overnight.
Yeah, so let's maybe say, let's call it next festival season. International DJs will come to the United States. And
Right.
what we talked about earlier too, I'm trying to, broaden my horizons. I'm trying to reach out to other people, and now the opportunity is there because they're not touring, and that's such a huge thing to try and line up times. If you're at home, you can make an hour, right?
Everybody has more time now, 100%. This is a good time to be doing podcasts where it's like, you can get people on Zoom or Skype or whatever much easier than a year ago when everybody's like, traveling and in and out of airports and blah, blah, blah. But it's like now you're like, hey, you got 30 minutes and, after or before dinner? And they're like, sure. I'm just going to be on my bed in my PJs, You're like, that's fine, whatever. As long as you got, you can talk into a laptop screen or a phone. I mean, I did an interview over Zoom the other day and the guest was on the phone.
Yeah.
It turned out fine.
Whatever. Right? Yeah, of course. I mean, you and I know how to overcome little things like that, right? Like we just want to get that sound bite.
Totally, yeah. And it's just, I love that stuff. Like I've obviously always been fascinated by like emerging technology and just different things you can do with tech. And it's so cool now that live streaming has like really finally like come into its own. It's live streaming was always sort of this like, in the back seat compared to like Instagram and other like social and digital tools. But now live streaming is really, I think, becoming pretty essential for most creatives.
Absolutely. That's a certain fact. I really want to talk to you about kind of the past, present, and future of podcasts, Jaime, because for someone like you, I mean, I started this 4 years ago in September.
Yeah.
Like, it's
a long time.
It's a long time, man. Yeah, it is. It is. And I put in the work, but I got to tell you, I love it so much. And every episode, I get more out of it and I enjoy so much. And this has been a great conversation so far, but I'm really interested because I want to ask you, here's the timeline, right? I watched one of these Spotify presentations, so to speak.
Sure.
And they showed a timeline that I thought was really interesting, and I wanted to share with you whether you were informed on it or not. 2004, podcasting is coined a term.
Right.
2014, you started 2005 with Dynasty. 10 years go by, right? People are kind of doing podcasts. I mean, I remember you telling me when in the class, SoundCloud was flying you out to San Francisco. I mean,
very different times, but yes, at one point, yeah.
But it was hot, right? Even between
it became hot after Serial. Serial, the show from NPR.
Yeah.
Like that really, I like to say that like that was, and young people aren't going to know what this means, but it's like Serial smells like Teen Spirit for podcasting.
Nice.
Podcasting existed before Serial, but no one knew what grunge music was until Smells Like Teen Spirit broke through,
God damn it, Jaime. This is why I love interviewing you. That is so accurate. And that was actually my next bullet point is Serial popularizes the podcast and becomes mainstream. That same year, Apple puts it on iOS devices and it's non-deletable, right? And I remember when I first started, I guess it would have been, it's 2020. I can't keep track of time anymore, like we said. I remember telling my friends, they were like, where do I find your podcast? And I said, literally just pull your iPhone down and search Sherm in the Booth, and it will come up on Apple Podcasts, right?
Yeah.
Insane. So it's like 2017, 3 years ago, Spotify launches podcasts. And for a lot of people that don't understand, Spotify did not make it very easy to get podcasts actually on there.
No, it was definitely something where you needed like an invitation, and you could apply. Well, I don't even think the application was open initially. It's like initially it was only open to a very small group of podcasters. Then a
feed,
a slightly larger pool of podcasters, and then you could apply, and you may or may not get turned down. And now, today, in the present, in July 2020, it's like, now you can put your podcast on Spotify. But they really were pretty. They were not open to everybody. It was very exclusive initially.
It was a Google Doc where I feel like I just like wasn't ever going to be heard, right? It was like sending in my resume to Google and I'm just some guy, right?
And sending in your resume to like info at. If you're emailing info at, you just know your email is not going anywhere to anyone, If you reach out to someone, you're like, hey, who can I reach out to about this? They go, oh, info at such and such.com. You're like, oh, well, thanks anyway.
Yeah, it was actually maybe a step below. Hello at Spotify.com.
Totally. Yeah,
Your
exactly.
information has been received. We will let you know, right? Like the most stock email. But
Right.
now, here we are in 2020, and just recently, the Joe Rogan podcast, probably the biggest podcast in the world, got bought for $100 million. Spotify is now looking into video podcasts on it. I mean, it's all
They're
of a
going
sudden.
in. Yeah, Spotify is like hungry for podcasts now, and it's really amazing that podcasts have now like they're legitimate, but Spotify for a long time was just music, and just like everything, it's like they're expanding and consolidating, and they're absorbing smaller companies like Anchor and Sound. Oh my God,
Gimlet too, right?
Gimlet, yeah, and there's other ones, and I'm blanking on one of them in my head, even though I know I've talked about it in my class. But yeah, like Spotify, they are really just going all in. I mean, they want to win in the podcasting space, and so it's definitely a platform that like it'll be interesting to see how people promote and utilize their podcasts in the Spotify space. Because if you're a musician, I don't have to tell you, like if you're a musician, it's all about getting on the right playlist.
Yes.
People don't listen to podcasts in a playlist, though. I'm not listening to Office Ladies and then hoping that there's an episode of WTF after it. It just doesn't really work the same way.
Yeah,
So
of course.
I'm curious to see like what the strategy is that develops, where if like I'm not a huge podcast like a Conan O'Brien, how do I utilize Spotify to my advantage? Because it doesn't seem like the tools are there yet, but I definitely feel like they're going to be there. Like Spotify is going to, right now they're focused on a lot of the creation stuff. Like, like I said, with Anchor, with the other platform that I am totally blanking on. I know it's got the word sound in it, and I feel dumb not thinking of it. But a lot of the tools that Spotify has absorbed so far are built around making your podcast, because we're still in the stage in terms of like the larger mainstream where people are still making, like they're still figuring out how to make them. But hopefully sooner or later, they're going to say, okay, great. You guys know how to make your podcast. Here's how to utilize Spotify as a platform to promote them and to get your show in front of people beyond just sharing a tweet with a link to the Spotify show,
Yeah.
Like, what's our version of a playlist?
That's a very good point. I mean, and what do you think about Spotify as a whole? Because as someone who produces music, it's really not fair for the artist, right? I mean, you have to be a world successful pop star, global artist in order to make money from streaming.
Yeah, you got to be a Drake, 100%. And, not to be like, well, if you think artists have it hard, but it's like podcasters don't make any money from Spotify.
Yeah.
Musicians make next to no money. We're in the same boat, to be sure. I am not being like, well, you musicians have it good. No, musicians need to be paid way, way, way more. So, like, we're all in the same boat that we're getting paid not near enough. It's just that our not near enough as podcasters means actually not anything at all. But I know musicians independently are, I mean, I've seen musicians I know who are independent artists, who have their day jobs, and I've seen them share their checks, their royalty checks for like 3 cents, and they're just like, I'm not driving to the bank. It's going to cost more to use the gas for this,
Yeah.
So I've seen those checks that come in, and I'm just like, oh my God, like that's so brutal.
Absolutely. There is a one thing about podcasting I think is maybe more advantageous in regards to the Spotify space is advertising. And I think these days, if you look at how advertisements are placed within podcasts, people that listen to podcasts, and look, I don't have advertisements that are hitting me up. I'm not mentioning anything on this podcast, right? But you got to be doing this consistently, and let's just call it maybe on the Joe Rogan scale, right? People trust what he's selling, and they buy in. I think Spotify actually shared it. It's 44% of people at the very least, I may trust the product, right? I mean, we are so oversaturated with the Instagram ads, the Facebook ads, the Twitter ads, the Snapchat ads, the everything ad, right?
Mm-hmm. But it's the host read. The host read makes all the difference, because if you just played a Coca-Cola ad that some random voiceover, artist that Coca-Cola hired reads, that doesn't really do anything on a podcast. But if you get Kevin Smith or Joe Rogan talking about like, this is my favorite such and such, people care about that. I mean, this is so embarrassing. This is a couple of years ago. I was in conversation with someone, and this truly happened. I wasn't thinking, we're talking about something, and without thinking, in part of the conversation, I just, let out, oh yeah, no, Kevin Smith was telling me the other day. And I stopped. I'm like, Kevin Smith's never told me shit in my entire life. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have a relationship with Kevin Smith.
We were talking about advertisements in podcasting and how people are really actually buying into it. 40% of people, I think it was 40 or 45% actually really believe and buy and take hold of these actual advertisements they hear.
Yeah, and there's something about the host read that works differently for people than just, a normal commercial that plays during like the Big Bang Theory or whatever on TV at night on CBS, right? Like that works for our grandparents, but for us, and even especially for the younger generation, like they really need an influencer or someone they trust to sell them something. And if an influencer says like, hey, this is the best windshield wiper fluid, or these are the best sunglasses, or this is the best suntan lotion, it really doesn't matter what the product is. If the host or the influencer or a personality can convincingly sell that, people will respond. Or at the very least, they're not going to turn off the podcast because it's still some form of entertainment, because they're still going to hear Joe Rogan or Kevin Smith or whoever, give them some banter. And I was starting to say this when we lost the connection a moment ago. Like, it's embarrassing. One time I was talking to somebody, and I literally, without thinking, I started to say, oh yeah, well, the other day Kevin Smith told me, and I stopped, and I'm like, dude, Kevin Smith's never told me anything. That's not a thing. But literally, I've been listening to Kevin Smith podcasts for so long that it just, for a split second, my brain just bridged it as like, right, when we were at Portillo's, Kevin Smith said ... and that's obviously not a thing that happened. But people definitely build these relationships, whether it again is a YouTuber, an Instagrammer, a podcast host. These are the celebrities or the personalities now for this era versus a Tom Cruise or Tom Hanks. You know what I mean? Whereas like before they were like traditional quote unquote celebrities, right? But now celebrity means something totally different.
So true. And there is that psychological aspect as well when you listen to a podcast and you feel like you're in the room too. So
yeah, %. Yeah.
There's so many aspects of podcasting that I think are still undiscovered that, again, like people like you and I are really at the forefront of. And it's crazy because you got to have consistency. And on that note, I mean, like without revealing too many details about your class, how do you be unique as a podcaster in what is now a saturated market?
That's a good question. And I don't want to say that I have a perfect answer for it yet. It's hard. I mean, in general now, it's like any kind of creator or anyone really doing anything, you can get overshadowed so easily on the internet because all it takes is Trump to say something or Kanye West to unfortunately have a breakdown on Twitter, which is sad.
Right.
Or Marvel drops a trailer out of nowhere and they're like, guess what, motherfuckers? Avengers 4.5. Didn't see that coming, did you? And then the timeline is just that. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter what you have. If Avengers 4.5 dropped tomorrow on iTunes and none of us knew that it existed until then, I mean, look at the Taylor Swift record the other day.
Yeah.
Taylor Swift announced it that morning that it was coming out that night,
No promo.
Right. So, let's say that I had been working on something for 6 months and I was like, I'm going to announce it this morning at 10 a.m. I've had the date in my calendar for 4 weeks, and I go to announce it at 10 a.m. and 10:01, Taylor Swift announces that she's dropping a new record. Well, my rollout is ruined. You know what I mean? So it's not just podcasting. It's like if you're a podcaster, you're not just competing with other podcasters. You're competing with just everything, and you kind of have to hope when you put something out that like Trump or Kanye or Marvel basically isn't owning that, or let's say Elon Musk isn't owning that moment. I think all you can do is like, there's a lot of talk about like niche, like having something that's niche. So the opposite of something like Drake. Like I always tell people, like my students, I'm like, your grandmother loves Drake. Like everyone likes Drake, right? You don't need to be Drake. Most of us can't be Drake. But it's like if you have 50, 100, 250, 500, 1,000 people who are actively engaged with what you're doing, that's more than enough to like honestly, there's something to be said for having not massive Coachella-size audience, which sure would be great for all of us, right? But you don't have to have that. You just need to be able to engage like a smaller group. And if you can do that, but it's consistent and you have that niche and like you own that niche, that's going to really mean a lot. Like I look at like Andrew Barber. Andrew Barber has done such a good job of developing and sustaining Fake Shore Drive as a brand. And it's a brand that, initially it just was a blog starting out, and then it moved into events and worked with Red Bull. And it's like now it's like this legacy thing that it doesn't have to just be a blog because it owns the niche that it's in, and he's been very smart about that. And that's just one example. But like I look at the Tribe too. The Tribe is not as big as USA Today, but they're so good at telling the stories that affect communities, and like they know who their audience is in Chicago. And there's so many examples. So in general, I think if you're a creator, don't worry about having 50 million followers, because unless you're a Jenner or a Kardashian, you're not going to.
Yeah.
Focus on having like 100 or 500 actively engaged participants. And oh my God, like, I mean, look, like I discovered Kevin Smith movies when Clerks came out. I'm still listening to those fucking podcasts. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, and he doesn't have Drake numbers. I mean, to be fair, Kevin Smith is a large audience, but he doesn't have Drake numbers.
Right.
You don't need that. You just have to own your audience. So in general, I think for podcasters, I've had people take my class and they're like, okay, how do I monetize this? And it's the first thing they ask. And we haven't even like started the workshop. And I'm like, you don't have anything to monetize. You know what I mean? Like, don't worry about winning the Super Bowl if you've never picked up a football before. That's not a concern. But if you can say, hey, I am a car repair podcast for people who own classic cars. Mm-hmm. That might not be 100 million people in the United States, but I bet whatever number that is, if you can speak directly to that audience, holy shit, you won. Like, you own that audience now, and they're going to buy your t-shirt, they're going to buy your water bottle, and they're going to come see you do a live show or watch you do a live webinar and pay for it.
I mean, it is such a fundamental aspect, and I think that is a great bridge between podcasting and being an artist, because it is all about these days. I think you said it, whether you know it or not. Finding your lane in a saturated market just means finding the people who care about what you do, right? Right. And there's this term that I've interviewed this guy. His name's Evan Price, and he runs this artist consulting company called Artist Collective. And his big fundamental aspect of it is finding your super fans. And one thing I really connected with him on was finding, I said, hey, I want 1,000 people that are going to pay $100 a month on average across the year to get behind the scenes footage of Sherm in the Booth, to get a Sherm hat, to get a Sherm shirt, to come to a live show, right? Rather than 1 million people who will like my Instagram photo.
Which doesn't do anything.
It doesn't do anything, right? Like, and I think that's the best piece of advice you can give is do what you're going to do and make sure you love it. And we're really wrapping it all around.
Right.
And make sure you're targeting those people because, long tail marketing, niche marketing, right? You got to find those people who actually are interested in your stuff. And that can take time. And I think that's why a lot of people stop what they're doing because look at you, right? 10 years go by and people are like, yeah, that's cool. That's great. Right. And then that next 5 years, people are like, wow, you're a pioneer. You're amazing. Right.
It is. It's so weird. It's like, and that's a story as old as time of people like getting to the party too early and they look dumb, but then all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, you did this, and that's been the case so many times. And I will say this too, it often does not feel like it doesn't always feel like a win to be someplace early because you're doing all the grunt work and then someone else is going to show up and like see everything that's been done and then just step right in and like earn money off of it. So getting there first doesn't always pay off, especially not right away. But I don't know, there's something kind of fun about, like, I'll give you an example, live streaming. Obviously, you know how to live stream, I know how to live stream. I was working with a couple of my friends, Michael Wing, who's in the DJ group Autograph, who's also a tremendously skilled tech and digital media creator. So I was working with Michael and a couple of our other friends, and these are, the other two individuals. They're very smart, tech savvy, like creators. We're four of us sitting around, and this was, 7 years ago or so, maybe 6, 7, 8 years, somewhere in that range. We're sitting around, we're messing with microphones, we're messing with my MacBook, we're messing with like probably Ustream or something. And it took me and 3 other equally skilled, intelligent, ambitious tech creators. It took us hours to be able to get 3 microphones to work with a live stream because we could only get 2 of them to pick up. And I bring that up because it's like now, if you live stream, live streaming is still a little tricky, but it's not near as impenetrable as it was back then. But there's also something that was kind of fun about like just sitting down and being like, we got to solve a puzzle, and there's no box with the picture on it, and there's not even any art on the puzzle pieces, and we're wearing blindfolds. Go. But I always love being in that space where it's frustrating, but then you build this thing and you're like, oh, cool, I got this thing made. So I like being early, even though often it's a lot more fucking work and it's more of a pain in the ass.
Yeah, it's like hosting a pregame, right? Everybody's like, "Wow, whose party is this?" And you're like, "Oh, Time May's place." You're like, "Wow, this party's so great, right? I didn't even know it was going to go down tonight." I love that actually.
Yeah, no, totally. But this is a good time. I mean, just in general, for anyone who's listening, it's like this is a good time to be a creator. And if, as you've said, if you're starting to create anything, a blog, a YouTube channel, a newsletter, a podcast, whatever it is, and you're hoping to get paid within a week or 5 days or 2 days or a month, it's like you might be waiting, but work on building something sustainable long-term that you care about, and you will find those monetization avenues because they will come. People want to give money to things that are going to stick around, made by people who, the audience knows that they care about that thing, Nobody wants to give money to something if it's been around 3 days and it doesn't seem like the creator cares and it doesn't seem like it's going to last.
Yeah, I mean, that is such a true statement. And I think that's great advice. Really, my last question for you was, Jaime, what would be your advice for someone who's been doing this as long that maybe wants to get involved now? And to give you an example, one of our mutual friends who I think you just met, Brian Gorecki, a birthday party.
Sure.
Well,
yeah, I've known Brian.
Yeah. Brian was interested in starting a podcast, and I know he talked to you, right? Like, maybe give an example of what you guys talked about, because I know he's trying to be unique, and there are a lot of people who reach out to me about podcasts these days.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think if you want to become a creator, or you are a creator who is, making one thing, but you want to move into a different space, here's how I'm looking at it, especially this year and this moment in time. Man, there has never been a better time to sit down, stay home, and watch a shit ton of YouTube tutorials on things you don't know about, tune into free webinars, and have some Google Docs open and take notes. And man, I am not kidding. It's like I am taking free work, and I'm literally going to drop some names because for real, you should be, not saying you, but in general, people should be doing this. Google Garage. Let's try it again. Google Digital Garage. Yeah. Google Digital Garage is a platform where there's a ton of free workshops and webinars and courses on digital media skills, and you can get certified there. Coursera Plus. Coursera is a online course platform, but if you pay for Coursera Plus, which is $400, so I know money's tight right now. I'm not saying everyone can do that, but if you got $400 and you're like, well, should I buy some shoes that no one's going to see for a year and a half? God, if we're lucky. Or should I put that money into something? If it's not Bitcoin, Coursera Plus, $400, you get access to all these college and university courses from different universities, but the $400 gives you unlimited certification options. So you can take all these courses, and then instead of, taking a data science course and then you get certified and you have to pay for one certificate, and then you take a machine learning course and you have to pay for that certificate, you just pay up front and you're like, hey, I took a year and I got certified, $400 for the year. And after a year, you say, hey, I'm certified in these 6 things or these 8 things. YouTube tutorials. There's so many YouTube tutorials on any subject. So, man, I'm not going to lie. I'm playing it safe. I am staying home. I'm really nerdy. I'm being so nerdy about this, right? I'm staying home. And I know everyone's like, so over this, and that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah.
I'm staying inside, and look, I'm bored too, but every day, all I'm doing is watching tutorials from all these different platforms, and so many, General Assembly is another one. So many of these, different platforms and course sites and even universities, they're offering free webinars every day now. If you sit down and you take this year to watch a bunch of free webinars, try some different things, experiment making a website, or, experiment making an online course or writing a book or whatever, guess what? When there's a vaccine or when it's safe to really resume life, you're going to be like, oh my God, I got 4 other monetization revenue streams, or I've got like all these new skill sets I learned. I don't know. I sound like an old man being like, stay inside and learn, kids. But if you're ever going to have the opportunity, and boy, that's not a word people use a lot with 2020, but I will use it in this respect, we're never going to have, let's hope, another opportunity like this where we all have a free pass to like stay home and not have to be social. There's no FOMO. I don't miss any, like, I miss things. But when I see people breaking quarantine and going out and socializing, I'm not like, oh, why didn't you call me? I'm just like, oh no, don't go kill your parents.
Yeah.
In general, like, I just think this is a great year to sit inside, watch some tutorials, webinars, take some courses, get certified, whatever it is. That information is out there now. Do this, and then a year from now, you're going to be like, holy shit, I'm so glad I learned data science while I was in quarantine. Now I own a Ferrari. I don't know. That anyone who does data science is going to be like, that's not how it works, man. But you get what I'm saying.
Of course I do, Jaime. And I think that is great and genuine advice. And I really do appreciate you just kind of sharing something that is so real, because there is a lot of free information out there. And I think in the beginning, as compared to 2-3 months ago, as where we're at now, I think a lot of people were kind of overcoming the fact that this might be real, right? And now it's tangibly in our hands. Like, this shit is real.
It's real. It's here. I mean, look, you can go out and hang out and party and do whatever, but it's like there might be consequences. And look, for some people, there might not be. But I don't want to take that risk. I don't want to accidentally get my parents sick. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, this is a good year to stay inside. And then whenever it is actually really, truly safe to go out again, I am done staying inside for a long time. So, but this is a good year to do that. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like, and anyone can hit me up on Twitter. I'm happy to send you a list. My Twitter is at Jaime Black, Jaime Black. So it's not Jamie, it's Jaime Black. Hit me up on Twitter. I'm happy to send you links to the different websites I am watching tutorials on, but this is a good time to do that, man. I'm hoping to learn some new skills coming out of this. I want to I want something to show for this year, because, man, if I'm staying inside, I need to have something tangible on the other side of this.
Yeah, I love that. Well, what do you have in store right now? Do you have anything you can announce? Any new maybe things you're doing with the podcast or anything?
The big thing is the Dynasty Academy stuff, and that is the thing where, I'm going to have some courses that I'm developing. And like I said, by the time this hits, the Intro to Freelancing course will be available for pre-sale. There's an early bird price that's available for a limited time. Mm-hmm. And really, truly, that course is a labor of love, where I just want to help independent creators and, people who are looking to freelance but maybe are intimidated, don't know how to do it, don't know how to price their work, don't know how to get started, don't know how to get paid, blah, blah, blah. I want to help people do that, because my life, when I started building multiple revenue streams, when I started, teaching the podcast class on Airbnb, not remotely, like, I'm not at the point where I'm like, and I bought a Ferrari. This is not one of these late night commercials. I'm like, I did this, and now I'm Mr. Money. It's not that, but it did make life easier. So I want to help other people not be struggling, because you and I both know, as a creative, it's so easy to struggle. It's so easy to make something cool, and then you get to the monetization part and you're like, oh, right. So I want to help people get past that and be able to actually, I don't know, like, make a living sounds lofty, but I don't want people to be suffering, starving creators, because you don't have to be anymore.
Yeah. I think that's really powerful stuff. And I think it's a fact of the matter, right? I mean, creatives these days, we have to work harder than ever. And I do think, to kind of wrap it all around, I mean, there are going to be a lot of people who stop and maybe go to that 9-to-5 job because they were already paycheck to paycheck, and now if you can't even get the fucking government checks, like I can't tell you how many DJ friends I have that can't even get a $400 check a week, Jaime, and it's frustrating for me. I'm grateful because I've kept a day job.
Yeah.
It's given me the ability to, be able to upgrade the podcast and do interviews and all that sort of stuff, right? And put my best foot forward. But I've had a lot of points where I'm like, I don't want to do my day job anymore. I want to put everything in. And there are so many musicians and creatives and artists and anybody outside of the cubicle, let's call it, that are now in a tough situation.
Well, I want to help those people because I have been there. When the last recession hit in the 2000s, I did not have the tools I needed. And man, it took years for me to be able to get my career where I wanted it to go because A, the recession was not helping, but B, I didn't know what tools I needed. And so through a lot of trial and error, through teaching, freelancing at Columbia, through building my own projects and developing my own company, now I feel like I'm a lot better prepared. So again, if people want to check that out, www.dynastyacademy.com, Intro to Freelancing. I want to help creators not be stuck and not have to, I want them to be able to live to their potential and create to their potential and not be suffering and starving.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And I'm absolutely going to push that. This will be a clip I share afterwards as well, too. And I really commend you, Jaime. I mean, I do look up to you in so many different ways. It's really,
nice.
Seriously, man. I mean, you've done so many things for the Chicago scene. And just as a podcaster, right, who's had a lot of moments in a dark room where I don't know if I want to keep doing it. And I see somebody like you who enjoys it through and through and gets a lot out of it. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to, I know, a lot of other creators out there. So this has been such a fun interview.
Oh, man, thank you so much for the invitation. That's so nice. And it's so cool. I love what you're doing because, A, you took my podcast class after you started, so I don't have any sense of just oh, well, I taught that guy what he knows. You were already going. And it's so cool to see what you have made with your show. And, when I was scrolling through, the guest list, I was like, oh, I know that guy, I know that guy, I know that guy. There's Dom, there's Fi, there's Brian, and and these are Chicago people we know. But then also you got some really big names. You got you're in that EDM, that nightlife world, and so it's very cool what you're building. And I have a feeling you're going to be doing the same kind of thing or not the same thing I did, but you're going to probably come to that same kind of fork in the road where it's not just DJs, where it's a larger picture because. Yeah. You run out of people after a while, or you go, you know what? A chef is not a DJ, but that dude's doing the coolest fucking restaurant concept I've ever seen. Let's talk to him,
Yes, absolutely. And I got to tell you, I'm already at that crossroads and the beauty of it, right? This is my thing. I'm not owned by anybody, and it's up to me who I want to have on. And I think it's so exciting to talk to people who are not just DJs, right? It's fun for me, and I want to continue to get better and better. And it's people like you. I mean, I look through some of your old podcasts. You talk to rappers backstage at festivals. You talk to chefs, talk to entrepreneurs, and I'm just like, you know what? If I can do it, I can do it too.
Oh, anybody can do this, man. It's I grew up very much, again, just to shout it out to Kevin Smith again. I grew up on Kevin Smith in his interviews and movie commentaries and then podcasts. Being man, I am just some guy from Jersey. If I can do this, you can too. And I'm not making movies, but it's I love that idea that you don't have to, it's not this cult of genius where it's well, Steven Spielberg is a genius and we're all idiots. It's anybody, if you're persistent enough and if you do the learning and if you do the trial and error and you just get started and then you get better and you make mistakes and learn, we can all go create shit. And yeah, maybe it is or isn't going to become E.T. or Stranger Things or, whatever. But it's just do something cool because the tools are all there. The knowledge is all there. We've never had access to, if you want to make a newsletter, you want to start a blog, you want to become a rapper, you want to publish music. Well, these platforms are all here. Most of them are free. There's no reason not to do these things. I love that.
I love that too, man. I got to tell you again, Jaime, thank you so much for making the time. It's such a pleasure to talk to someone who's so well spoken and takes this business, this vertical of creativity seriously. So this has been such a great time, sir. I appreciate it.
Awesome, man. Thank you again for having me on. And we'll keep in touch. I'll bring you back on the show.
You got more to teach me.
I would love to do it, man. And I'm just throwing it out there. I think a lot of my creator friends, yourself included, should be maybe thinking about developing like just even like a 2-hour workshop you throw on Eventbrite. It's like, why not? You know?
Yeah.
I just think we're in this like education economy where we could all be learning so much from each other.
Yeah, I agree.
So.
You know what? You can just continue to inspire me, don't you?
Well,
Multiple streams of revenue, baby, right?
that's awesome. But this was super cool. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem, Jaime. I'm looking forward to everybody hearing this interview, and it'll be out next week, and we'll talk to you then.
Awesome, man. Have a good evening.
You too, my man. Talk to you soon.